AMD, Advanced Micro Devices by Eric Marten. What is AMD? AMD is a multinational corporation that specializes in the construction of CPUs, graphics cards known as GPUs, and an innovator in that market. What is the history of AMD? AMD started in 1969 and produced their first product. In 1981, they started to sign a technology deal with Intel that would allow the trading of technology between the two companies. In 1982, that deal was officially signed, and AMD became the second major manufacturer of CPUs. And in 1984, AMD produced their first non-Intel cloned product. In 1991, they introduced their very first 386 compatible chip, which was impressive at the time because Intel had a monopoly on that market. In 1991, they began to compete with Intel properly. In 2011, AMD announced Bulldozer, a CPU architecture designed to be low-powered, have high cores, but average frequencies on those cores. The problem is that Bulldozer never lived up to his expectation. Even Bulldozer's successor, Excavator, also never lived up to expectation and was never able to compete properly with Intel. This is even after 20 products over their life cycle. This all changed in 2017 though, when AMD announced Ryzen. Ryzen is a brand new type of CPU architecture that revolves around scalability. The key to Ryzen is something known as the Infinity Fabric, which is the link that connects the CPU cores themselves to the input outputs and allows everything to flow through the CPU. Ryzen first launched with 4, 6, and 8 core offerings. The first generation Ryzen performed better than most expected. Everybody expected it to be another bombshell because of AMD's reputation and their past performance. The pros to Ryzen was that its multi-threaded performance was through the roof compared to Intel competition, and the price to performance was insanely good. You can get a 6-core processor for only about $260, while Intel did not even have a mainstream product at that price range. The only way you can get something remotely 6-core or better was to go to the high-end desktop line, which started at $600. After the success of Ryzen's initial launch, AMD announced their new high-end desktop line, Threadripper. Threadripper's goal was to produce a product that would be enticing for the workstation user, the video editor, the movie maker. Threadripper was designed very differently from the basic Ryzen chips. Instead of having a single core on a single piece of silicon, it uses 4 separate pieces of silicon. These 4 dies, or core clusters, if you will, are all connected together with the Infinity Fabric to have an incredible amount of scalability. These CPUs are essentially cut down servers processors for a much cheaper price. Threadripper's performance was astronomical when it came to multi-threaded and productivity workloads. This is also helpful because they are basically server-grade processors in the price range that a workstation user or a productivity-focused individual would find enticing. The cons, though, was that its single-threaded performance could not beat any of Intel's offerings at this price range and core counts. They were also pretty power-hungry CPUs. After the initial launch of Zen, the term AMD uses to call Ryzen was Zen Plus, which was a incremental upgrade. The upgrade between Bulldozer Excavator to Ryzen was 40%, an astronomical jump generation to generation, but between Zen and Zen Plus was only about a 10% increase, if that. Zen Plus, as I just said, has a marginal increase over its first generation brothers, maybe 10% at best. But the most interesting thing is that they were completely backwards compatible with old motherboards. You could put a second generation Ryzen into a first generation compatible motherboard. And they were still far cheaper than Intel's offerings at the time. Zen Plus also introduced the first APUs using the Zen architecture. An APU is a CPU and a graphics card put onto the same chip. These, known as the 2200G and the 2400G, were extremely cost-effective and were very powerful for what they were able to do. Next came Threadripper 2. Threadripper 2 is a generational increase over the original Threadrippers. They increased the maximum core count to 32 and were continuously designed with productivity in mind, just like the last generation. Still, most of them were cheaper than their Intel counterparts and continue to use the 4 CPU die design that Threadripper 1 did. Threadripper 2's performance was a hit and miss. The 2990WX, the 32-core model, had a lot of issues. The 2990WX's main issue is that out of the 4 CPU dies, only 2 of them were directly connected to memory. This meant that in order for a piece of data on memory to get to the other 2 core sets, it had to travel through many more components than it should have had to. This caused latency in certain programs and thus made its ability to multi-thread and be a monster like it was supposed to a hindrance. In Computex 2019, just a few months ago, AMD officially announced Zen 2, the 3rd generation of Ryzen. The major change here is a complete redesign of the architecture. The architecture basically uses a 14 nanometer input-output board, which whole job is just to move data in and out of the CPU, and the cores are separate on what they call chiplets. The cores are built on a 7 nanometer design, which means it's much cheaper to produce and much more cost-effective to use both in power and productivity terms. The server versions of this chip are supposed to go all the way up to 64 cores on a single piece of technology. Zen 2's performance at this time is unknown because it's not been released yet, but we can predict what its performance would be like. The power consumption is supposed to decrease because of the node shrinkage. The TDP, or the heat produced, should also be decreased because not as much power is flowing through these chips to get to the power level that they desire. The instructions per clock are expected to be 1.15 times higher. The Infinity Fabric, the link that connects everything together, is supposed to be doubled in its size. New memory drivers And the most important one is that Intel and AMD worked with Windows to update Windows 10 so that the scheduler will work much better with Ryzen-based products. This means that everything Ryzen has recently had a major boost in performance just by software alone. This picture shows the Zen 2 product stack as it stands right now, ranging from an offering at $200 all the way up to $750, all based to be price to performance very competitive against what Intel should bring to the table later this year. AMD is not just producing and innovating in CPUs, but also in the chipsets. The chipset is the thing that allows the CPU and the components within the computer to work together. One of the major features of the X570 chipset, though, is that it's PCIe 4 compatible. This is the first one ever to support this brand new architecture. PCIe 4 is supposed to allow a PC to use many more devices at once without a hindrance. AMD considered Ryzen their worst case scenario. How could this be? That's because it was a brand new product based on brand new architecture and used brand new construction techniques. None of this is ideal. You want to use known techniques, known architecture in order to cut down costs. If this failed, AMD could have been in very deep trouble. The worst case in this case was a new design, and it could have been the last chance for Intel to compete with AMD. AMD's main goal was to get to 7nm production, and they accomplished this with the Zen 2 system. The Zen, the first gen, was only on a 14nm process, Zen 2 on a 7, and in the future, who knows how much smaller they can produce these CPUs. The long-term goal is to continue to develop new technologies, promote and empower technologies like PCIe 4 and others, improve the CPU chipset design even more, and compete with Intel at every level from mobile all the way up to servers. Future plans for AMD include releasing the first 64-core processor on a single piece of silicon and expand into the mobile and laptop market. AMD has come a long way from the underdog, the budget option. In 2017, they released what many consider to be the product that shook up the CPU market and revitalized it. It actually caused Intel to get competitive again. It produced technologies that even rival Intel in certain aspects, but fell short in others. It will continue to innovate. Only the imagination of AMD is their limitations. Thank you.